initially it was all going to be about relationships and like the dynamics that we have with the different relationships in our lives and kind of like balancing the masculine and the feminine.
Sure.
And the reason to go with Infinitely Jen would just be kind of building up that pseudonym, which is what the book is under, and kind of the overall umbrella of all the random creative bullshit that I do.
Sure. I love because I go by Ryan James, which is my middle name, but it's always just been my stage name or pseudonym because people like, they see my last name, they're like, wait, what? And I'm like, good, my mission accomplished, because I think, and not in some like insane context, but like, I think it's important to have different identities, and you can accomplish different things under different identities. And I think that's an important characters, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It gives you creative freedom. You can do the things that you wouldn't necessarily do under the name that everybody in your family knows you by, everybody you've grown up with knows you by. Just gives you room to kind of wiggle around and express in different ways, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely. And people don't realize how many of their favorite actors and writers and all this is all pseudonym. And, you know, Whoopi Goldberg, like it's not her name. I mean, come on. And it's just funny. But yeah, it does give you interesting creative license and freedom, and kind of, you can become that character in a good way or a bad way. I think there's a Jekyll and Hyde there maybe too, where some people take on the Joker or become maybe a negative character, but so long as you understand or keep it on a leash or know, like, yeah, I think there can be really good outcomes from it.
That's a really good point and an interesting dynamic, because I think when we use it as like a costume that we're putting on, it's still us underneath, you know, like we're still at that core. But when it's something that takes on a life of its own, you don't necessarily have control over how that's going to grow. Just like when you're starting a business, you know, it can go in different directions. And, you know, even if your first love is music and you get into videography, like that can just have this whole encompassing effect on your life, and you don't know where that's going to go.
And wonderfully so, because yes, we all seek control and comfort to a certain degree. I think it's important to have some guardrails, in life, but there's something beautiful in the mystery and some of the chaos, because where you've ended up, where I've ended up, where people end up, especially in the creative path, is I had all these preconceived notions about what I would be doing and how it would look and what it would sound like. And even with this place, building it out, I had all these weird hangups about, I got to get rid of those drop tiles. It's a big deal. I got to get rid of them. Like, now I don't even look at them or care.
Right.
It was like this real problem, and now I'm like, that doesn't matter,
and no one's gonna look at them until you point it out.
No. And I mean,
I do remember though your initial plans. I remember you posting about them, and they looked pretty badass. So.
That's funny. Yeah, well, somehow, I mean, some way, and I just signed the lease for 3 more years, so I mean,
maybe someday
I've got time. And the mission too is in that next 3 years to grow beyond this place and have an even bigger, broader vision. And it is a good, but I think it is important to have some of that mystery along the way, because like you're saying, I went to school for music and then bought a camera when I graduated, and everyone's like, why would you waste your money on a camera? And it totally changed my life. My heart was telling me I needed to. And it's like, you know, and that's another important, I think, point, is like following that compass, the internal one, that's like, especially creatively, where it's like, no, I have to do this. I don't know what it is. I have to do this. And that leads you, I don't think it's ever steered me wrong, that creative like compass or magnet or whatever, something pulls you, and it's just important to like kind of let it take you somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic place to be. And when you can kind of release the judgment of that process, then it expands that much more. When you first bought that camera, what did you think you were going to use it for?
That's interesting. The reason I bought it is because I was in this band, and these guys came by and filmed the music video for us, and they used the Canon T2i. And I remember being like, ooh, but it was one of the first consumer available like DSLRs that could shoot 1080p in a decent bit rate, and it looked great.
Yeah.
And they filmed it with these cameras. I'm like, those are photo cameras. What are they doing? And lo and behold, when they delivered the video, I'm like, this was filmed in our house with these cameras. I'm going to buy one. Like,
yeah. And why wouldn't you?
Yeah. And I'd always been like a hobbyist photographer, I guess, like had point and shoots or family cameras, 35 millimeter, you know, but that was like a real paradigm shift where it's like, okay, and I bought it from Sammy's Camera in Hollywood, and it was, you know, it's an iconic store in Hollywood, and had no idea what I was doing. It's just the kit lens. And I remember I bought a Hoodman 16 gig memory card, and it was like $200 for the memory card. And just, they're like, that's a good deal. Now they're like $5.
No, I totally remember that. Like in college, getting memory cards was ridiculous. So California, did you grow up in California?
I grew up in Richmond, Illinois, but
okay.
I moved there when I was 20. Okay. Yes. And
so
again,
your own journey.
Following that creative compass of my best friend who I grew up with in Richmond, who was like I was his musical protege, I guess. He was just on another level. And when he moved to California and went to the LA recording school, and I'm like, bro, you just left me here in Richmond. I can't, like, so I followed him. Basically, I went to go visit him and toured the school, and he was like a celebrity there already because he was just a savant musician and engineer. And I was like, wait, you can record music for a living? Like, it never even occurred to me. And I got just fully immersed in like the production world, and I'm like, I got to figure out how to get here. And it took a while, but ended up moving out there and living there for 3 years and doing the whole first music production, like studio production, and a lot of production audio for like low budget films, medium budget films, and pilot TV shows and shit. And it was cool, but Hollywood's a gnarly place that I don't really care to go back to. Yeah.
It's interesting. I really thought I would have a journey out there. Again, went during my college years, and everybody in my class was headed out that way. Mm-hmm. Some of my really core friends headed out that way. But actually, I went out on a trip to follow a boy, as you do. And somewhere amidst that trip, like everything just kind of crumbled, both in the relationship personally, and like my worldview of what Hollywood was kind of snapped into that. Like we had gone to a party at one point, and I could just tell instantly that like I would not have fit in that city. It just wouldn't have jived. And I'm glad I didn't try and fit into that mold.
Yeah, I was trying to force myself the whole time. I knew that I was an outsider, and it's almost like a trope, or like
for sure,
where people in LA are so, but they are. I mean, you can find pockets of great people everywhere, but there's a higher concentration of narcissistic,
that's
like,
exactly
kind of sociopaths, where it's like, what can you do for me? How can I leverage you to gain favor? A lot of just fakeness, and I pride myself on being real and having integrity and real connections, whereas it's much more difficult to find because it's it's the most chaotic place I've ever been energetically, like more than New York, more than Chicago. It's just so chaotic.
Which makes total sense when you're thinking about a city full of people all chasing different creative dreams who are really like intrinsic, like creatives are great at manifesting lives. And when you have so many different lives coming together, like you're in the thick of it, and that's beautiful. Like being in the center of all that chaos is a really powerful place to be. But when you walk into a room and you can't start a conversation without somebody being like, oh yeah, and this is the project I'm working on. It's like,
Here, cool. That would seem very strange if you interjected, like, and even Lake Geneva, which is somewhat of a materialistic place to some degree.
Yeah.
But there's like a wholesomeness or humbleness to it that's different. Yeah. And my friend who grew up there, he was like one of the only Hollywood natives I ever like met, because everyone else was from everywhere else. And he's like, yeah, man, it's really sad because 10,000 dreams are breaking any moment, and maybe one's coming true, maybe, or it's probably the ratio is even more than that. It's like 100,000 people heart is broken and they're leaving because they didn't get the gig, and they're like, I'm going back to Cleveland. So that collective like feeling is in the air, whereas there's one person who's like, I got the role. That's heavy because there's a lot of disappointment, and it's a palpable feeling. Yeah. Also too, it's just like, since everyone wants to be there because of the weather, and it has a lot of systemic issues, just, unsustainably, like it's too large, and they don't have water. It's a desert. I mean, you could get into the infrastructure issues
and same thing in Vegas, a huge suicide
same
rates
vibe
based
there.
off. Yeah.
Very same vibe. Desperation. It feels desperation.
Yeah. That brokenheartedness is like the key. You're totally right there.
Yeah. And the sadness, that's something that really struck with me, and why I wanted to leave. Like, I didn't want to leave, but I knew I wasn't going to be there forever. It was just that seeing you'll see like a Rolls Royce and then a person in a cardboard box, and like juxtaposed, like right next to each other. And you're like, wow, that is like
total polarity.
a $500,000 car, and like a guy who doesn't have anything, and they're next to each other. And I'd never seen that like stark contrast ever.
Yeah.
Because where else does that exist,
Well, and it's like same thing. You go to Alaska, all these people move up there thinking it's a beautiful place, and then complete financial failure, and you can't even leave because you're so far removed. You don't have a way to get back to where you came from or anywhere else, really.
Yeah, I know the alcoholism there's like worse than anywhere. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Per capita is the worst. Suicide rate's the top.
I think rape is pretty high.
Oh, I bet, because there's the ratio is just like, it's a whole different. It's rugged, and I mean, that goes to show too, like how you can thrive in the right environment, and in the wrong one, it just ain't gonna work. And that's. Yeah. I feel so fortunate for having grown up where I did. I mean, I used to just think, I can't wait to get out of here. This is the worst place ever. And then when I moved around and came back, it's like, this place is actually pretty cool, especially Lake Geneva, because I always took Lake Geneva for granted as a kid. I'm like, whatever, it's the beach, who cares? Like I didn't really care. And then as an adult, I'm like, wow, this place is so cool and magical. Why would I ever leave? Like, I want to be here forever.
Yeah, it's an interesting place to call home. You definitely get a sense in the air of like some of the philanthropy.
Yeah,
that's really anchored in this area. And then I think even beyond that, like when you go back to like the Native American history of the land, like you feel that here. You feel that deeply in Wisconsin, and there's some good heart there.
I love Wisconsin, just flat out. I'll just say this to everyone and everyone. Like, real. I really love the state of Wisconsin. I was born and raised in Illinois, but I call Wisconsin home because my heart is here, and all my family, my parents are both born and raised in Wisconsin, and just by default I happen to be Illinois, but
timing.
I'm working out of it. I'm in recovery of Illinois. But yeah, it's a beautiful place, and it's funny. I meet people all the time, like, people from because within the comeback, they're always like, everyone from Wisconsin is so nice. I'm like, are we? I guess so. Not everyone, but it's a common thing where they're like, you guys are really nice here.
It's a culturative norm, and we try and just buy into being good people. But I'm the same way. I'm a transplant. I've been kind of living over the border most of my life. My folks split when I was 4, and my mom moved up to kind of the Sheboygan area, and tiny little town actually where Sargento is based out of.
I've been to their headquarters.
Yeah, it's a sweet spot.
Yeah.
And my dad stayed down in the Crystal Lake, Illinois area, and kind of going over the border was like this catalyst for change within my life, like recognizing that I could go down one path of kind of like materialism and being caught up in like suburbia and the drive to like maintain a certain posture in the world versus just exploring like what genuinely felt good on a personal level. And to me, like Wisconsin, I'm totally romanticizing it, but it represents that, it represents that freedom, and it represents like being okay with one's roots and being okay with being a little bit more connected to the seasons, being a little bit more in tune with everything on an agricultural level, which I think like as humans awakens something a little bit deeper in us. Absolutely. And I can very well said, because I feel that entirely. Growing up in a rural agricultural area, I guess I again took it somewhat for granted because that's just what I knew, and being surrounded by farmland, and all my friends were farmers growing up, or a lot of them.
And I grew up on, kind of acreage. So, I agree, like that connection to the earth and like getting in the dirt and climbing trees and just like swimming in rivers and jumping out of trees into the lake. Like that's like a primal thing. People have been doing that from the beginning of time. And I think it's an important thing to, if you didn't grow up near, to at least experience, because there's something it's like reconciling. Like you have to feel the waters and like swim in the water and feel the cold, it matters. It does create a very well-rounded, I think, spiritual and experience. And that's something I steered into, maybe not even knowingly, but again, trusting that compass of like, I have to go into the wild. Like I have to seek discomfort or, limit because I love tech. I mean, I love gear and gadgets and all this stuff, but I also love the absence of it, especially like the best things in my life have come from disconnection, and all my songs and all my guitar and all that, like the best me is completely isolated or like disconnected from the internet and all the noise and chatter and all that.
Present in the moment. Yeah.
In nature. Sure. There's a beautiful, it's a Japanese, term called satori. And it's like this perfect stillness felt in nature where it's just where you're quieted and like you're just existing in the stillness of nature. And that really resonated with me. Funny enough, on a random trip from LA to Oregon, my friend invited me. He's like, do you want to go up there for spring break? And I'm like, yeah, let's go. Yeah. And I woke up in the Illinois Valley of Oregon. I'm like, what? Illinois Valley? Like we drove up there through the night. Right. And like Illinois, it just threw me for a loop. And I'm like, but it's just this pristine, beautiful, largely rugged, undeveloped portion of southwestern Oregon. And I never went back to LA. I'm like, I'm staying here. This is it. I want to live here in the woods and just be a farmer, basically. Like that was and I did, because it was just like, so from the chaos of Hollywood to like the stillness of the woods. I'm like, this is where I belong, right here. I gotta stay here.
What a good like battery recharger after that period of time. Do you feel like that like brought you back to center?
Oh, it probably the most formative, most important experience of my life, if I'm being honest, because it was the spiritual catalyst of like understanding who I am and like where I come from and what the earth is. And to the native portion, a lot of my friends I made there were all natives, and being included on their tribal like life and like spending time with them, playing with them on their drum, and like it was just so beautiful and moving, and like it just spiritually shifted the direction of my life in a great way. So I'm very grateful for that. I don't know how that topic came up, but I think it had to do with the direction and connection to the earth and how important it is to center and ground yourself. In Wisconsin, like you said, it's very much part of the experience here.
Absolutely. And I think what's really important from all of that is just this, when you're talking about like the communication between us and the water and us and the air, and being able to actually like feel the dirt on your hands, and for the people who live in the city and don't get that experience on a regular basis, I would 100% encourage you to go out and do it, because there is a very innate communication that happens between our cells and the cells of everything else, because we are interconnected with everything else. Like, and when you're in a city, when you're in a building all the time and you're cloistered, and like your only experience of an animal is, maybe occasionally seeing a bird in a tree, and a tree in a cement block that can't get bigger than 12 inches around. Like, for you to go and stand next to a tree that's been standing for 300 years and has seen more generations than you have locally in your family in any given area, like that's huge. Like,
right.
And the trees all speak with each other, and like for us to experience that connection broadens our scope of reality instantaneously.
So I had the fortune of my neighbor in Oregon is this guy named Orville Camp. Love you, Orville. And he's a forest warrior. He developed what he calls ecostry, and oh my gosh, I need to remember his exact nomenclature on it. But basically, he developed a sustainable type of forestry whereby instead of clear cutting, because that's the practice, is you clear cut everything and then spray the rest with atrazine. And it's like this horrible process. Any ecosystem takes 10,000 years minimum to develop. There's so many different things, lichens, bugs, the mycelia, all these plants, all these animals. It's like over 10,000. It's one of the most biodiverse areas on the planet is Southern Oregon. And when you clear cut land like that, it will never be in the next 10,000 years the same thing.
And it won't ever be the same thing, period.
No.
Because it's going to evolve into something else entirely.
Yeah, you change the lineage of that. And he developed a way that you take the dead and dying trees and create these system of basically fire roads, because wildfire is one of the primary reasons where they're like, well, we have to clear cut it. It's going to burn down. It's like, yeah, well, you can maintain and be a steward of like this beautiful living thing, or the inverse, which they do, is just destroy it and then be like, we'll worry about, that's other people's problem. And you actually get more lumber per acre linear foot by doing his method. And he's proven it forever. He's like almost 90 years old. And I love the guy, but he happened to be my neighbor, and he was like the coolest guy I've ever met in my entire life, because he's just this forest warrior. He's like the living Lorax. That's what I would call him.
Oh my gosh.
The Lorax. Incredible. Yeah.
And his name is fantastic.
Yes. And he would host, because he grew up there in Southern Oregon in Selma, and he owned all this property, and he would host these kids, these forest warrior kids, who would be the ones who'd live in the trees when they went to cut them down. So we'd go in the forest, and I would help them.
I would do that 100%.
Yeah.
Strap me to a tree.
I could introduce you. I know where they're at.
Totally.
I would use my drone and fly up and look for these tree voles and different spotted owls. And then basically, if you can geotag these tree voles and spotted owls, they can't cut, I think it's for like a 50-acre radius or something.
Because they're protected.
Yes. Yeah. And so the loophole is you find these, they saved thousands of acres in Southern Oregon. Basically how it works too is if you find, they can't even make a road in. So if you find, they just don't even touch it. And they ended up saving like thousands and thousands of acres. And just really cool, because old growth forest like that is so majestic, and it needs to be preserved. You know what?
We don't have many left.
No, absolutely not. They're wholesale. The Bureau of Land Management will wholesale public land to logging. I'm sorry, this is going off on tangent, but I'm just passionate about it.
Yeah.
They will sell off public land to the highest bidder, or lowest bidder, as it were, to all these logging companies, which is public land. That's literally the song, "This land is your land." You can go on BLM property anywhere in the United States and camp for 2 weeks straight, and then move 10 feet over, and you can live on it. You can fish on it. You can hunt on it. Nobody really knows about it though. And they sell it and take all the trees, sell it for millions of dollars, and then leave you with a blank.
Yeah. Just wipe it out entirely.
It's craziness.
Yeah.
I could rant on that forever. That's a whole other podcast, but.
Well, and little side note too, like that process of the forest fires, like in a lot of cases, that's what some of those trees need specifically to be able to regenerate. Like they won't even seed unless the pine cones are burnt and charred and opened up
that
for
nitrogen,
a new generation.
It's very important part of the process. And living through a few wildfires out there, I remember the first one was so scary. I'm like, my friends were like, dude, it just happens every year. Like you deal with it and it'll go away. Like it's bad, but you just deal with it.
Yeah.
And it's the disconnection that human beings have I guess chosen, because it is a choice. It is like a lack of awareness. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like I truly believe the best like life is somewhere a hybrid of something. Like technology is very important and very useful. However, I don't want to 3D print a tree.
Right.
I don't care about the tech solution to a lot of these things, because nature just laughs in the face of that. Cause it's like, yeah, electricity is cool and all, but like an electromagnetic storm could just destroy the power grid at any moment. So it's like, you live at the mercy of something much larger, and it's time to like treat that with reverence, because human beings don't seem to, by and large, get that.
I have to apologize first and foremost while you're editing this. I make the weirdest faces. So
no, you don't.
Sorry.
I've become way less self-conscious the more I do these, where I'm like, whatever.
Right.
The hope is enough people watch it to talk shit about you, right? Like, cause it's like,
Ideally, yeah. And honestly, like, okay, so in this process of like releasing this book and getting it out into the world, I am equal parts absolutely thrilled and totally terrified to read that first review. Like,
well,
and coming from like the people that I know in the scope of the business and how they're going to completely shift the way that they see me, because it speaks on some heavier topics. It speaks on religion. It dabbles in witchcraft. It dabbles like all across the board. So lots of different things that I think are going to be hot button subjects for people. And in the scope of podcasting and having people hate on something being an ultimate goal, because then at least people are seeing it. And for every person that hates it, there might be someone out there who loves it and totally resonates. It's still a big shift, to move from, again, that one side of the camera to the other side of the camera. And using technology in a way that like furthers stories, that puts us in a place of being able to connect with others, but making sure that it doesn't get in the way of our connection to ourselves or to nature or to the greater whole that is out there. Like that, I think that's our most important question right now is like, what do we do with this tool? Maybe not the most important question, but it's up there. A
very important one, and one that I constantly think about and is a common recurring theme on my podcast or things I talk about with friends is, in the content creation world, things went from, we had these movies and then series, and then everything's being reduced down to where people are asking me for like 10-second things. I'm like, 10 seconds, like what is accomplished in 10 seconds that's meaningful? And I told my friend this the other day. He's a documentary filmmaker, and he was kind of having this rough time about the whole thing. And I'm like, dude, 100 years from now, your documentary will hold weight and water and be great and captivating, compelling. TikToks will be irrelevant. Nobody's going to look at a TikTok from 100 years from now and be like, maybe they will from like a reference point and be like, wow, what are they up to? But where does it go from here? You can't reduce something 5 seconds. We're just going to go to 5 seconds, because I just think we've actually already surpassed some of the threshold of like, no, I think it's time to go back to more meaning. And because podcasting is a perfect example of it. To me, it represents the campfire. Like that's the conversations. And from day one that I knew what podcasting was, I was always a talk radio listener. I loved NPR growing up as a kid.
Totally.
And then Sirius came about. My dad had Sirius, so I'd always listen to Howard Stern or whoever. I would just listen to long form conversation. I was fascinated by it. And I kind of, the movie The Christmas Story where they gather on the radio, and I kind of like missed that, because your imagination, for one, you're a fly on the wall for a conversation that you're not necessarily going to be present in. So it's like how fascinating that I can sit in and listen on these two really intellectual people talk about things I'm interested in and come away feeling enlightened, empowered, or like
sparked to explore something you didn't before, you know?
And it's a great equalizer in that regard, is that expression in that way and the connection you feel. I have like deep relationships with podcasters I've never met where I'm like, I love that person because I know them on a level intellectually where I'm like, I know your thoughts and I resonate with them. I think that's really cool. And that's mainly why I made this place, is to do that with and for other people, because what we're lacking right now is that communication and connection, because everything is so fake and brief and truncated. And 10 seconds, like I don't want a 10-second conversation. Never had one.
Right.
Doesn't work.
What it does is it stops your ability to pause and be contemplative. Like everything is so distracted right now, so distorted, so monetarily driven. And like, don't get me wrong, like, that's a part of podcasting. That's a part of thriving as a creative. But for that to be the only reason anybody's doing anything anymore is rough. Yeah. And so what switches that? It's narrative, it's story. And your metaphor for the campfire is fantastic, because like those are the moments when we come together and work out like, okay, what story are we moving into as individuals, as small groups, as societies, as humanity on a whole? Like where are we steering this ship to?
Yeah.
we have the power to choose that. So
Yes.
often we're sold this like concept that we don't have any role to play in that, but we so very much do. And it's not in a political scope.
No.
It's on an individual level, and it's an interpersonal level.
So well put. And it's the internal revolution that has to happen, that the crisis of consciousness and lack thereof, because without that conscious shift to, reconciling to nature and going back to simplistic ways, and again, as a hybrid of technology and that, because I think they can exist in harmony, but we've far surpassed anything it's way out of balance. And human beings act as if the earth owes them something, or that we're just like, it's tolerated at best, and it's this thing to be used and abused, and it's so backwards. And I think I really do believe the most important conversations in the world are happening on podcasts, and it is part of a consciousness shift that's happening, because I consider myself to be at least 25% more, like 25% of my entire intellect has come from podcasts without question, because it's introduced me to other ways of thinking. I've shut them off in the middle and been like angry at them or something, when I'm like, maybe they're right though, and I'm just
But you
wrong.
need to be like confronted by things,
Yeah.
you know, like we all need that, and we all need that moment of like
challenging
integration with it, where you do shut it off and you're like, I'm gonna
I don't
go
like
grumble
this.
for a minute and then come back to it. And okay, fine, I can face this.
And also too, it's like, maybe my view of the world wasn't well formed enough to where I didn't have a solid understanding of what this was. And the reason I got so worked up is because I couldn't defend my position, and it was like proven to be wrong. And that's the important part about conversation and dialogue and discourse, which has been lacking so much. I have a whole rant about texting I won't even go into, but I think that's the reason. It's a communication breakdown, where it's like, we're not designed to have we couldn't have this conversation through text ever. I don't care how long.
I mean, I could, but
I couldn't. I just mean that, like,
no, I hear you 100%. Just the writing aspect of it, you know, like
I don't care how good emojis get. No, that's not to say that spoken or like written dialogue is not very moving and important, but the way human beings have been programmed to communicate now via text and like this kind of sub language leaves out so much of the important details. And what my biggest problem with text is that it's left to the person sending and receiving to interpret or interpolate, like, what did they mean by that? So whatever mood you're in is whatever you read the text in. So people
it's literally just a projection of whatever your internal landscape is
at any moment. Whereas like you said, gesticulating, talking with your hands, all these different subtle cues can show otherwise. Where I'm not angry at you. You wouldn't construe that in this moment, but through text, it might be like, what did you mean by that? I just think it just leaves so much space for miscommunication. It's a very useful tool, but just misused. And I hope we can like bring that back around.
I 100% agree with that. And I'm being cavalier and joking about it, because that's just who I am.
Oh, yeah,
I laugh in the face of everything serious, and also 100% am there.
I'm the same way.
But that being said, like, there is this aspect of the thread that's underneath everything that I feel like people are finally coming online to more and more. It's finally becoming a mainstream conversation, but how much we interact on an energetic level. And sometimes for people that can be as basic as, you know, just the physical cues, just all of the non-verbal communication that we do in the room together. But when you walk into a room with somebody, like, you are sharing an energetic space with them. You can call it a vibe, you can call it a groove, whatever you want to call it. But like, we come together and co-create based off of all of these things that are being shared between us that have nothing to do with verbalized thought, you know? The
subtext, like the invisible world. I mean, there's so many dimensions of reality that we don't even understand or fully occupy, or, I mean, I don't know. I can't speak to how many we actually occupy at any given moment, but it's funny because I used to be the exact opposite of who I am today. Like, I didn't believe in anything metaphysical, or like, I dismissed it as like woo-woo nonsense.
Totally.
And was just completely like, pfft, until I experienced it and like had real, I guess, real feelings of it, like vibes. And you said vibes. I used to think that was just some like hippie word. I'm like, what is that? What are you talking about? And then I'm like, everything is literally a vibration, and you can feel them and sense them and see them. And nothing exists isolated from anything else. You're the amalgam of everything seen and unseen, and all these unknown forces and energies. And I find that to be the most beautiful thing of existence, is not knowing that it exists, but not being able to define it or contain it. And I think that, to me, that's the most like magnificent thing of being alive, is just knowing how big and broad and vast and like mysterious it is. I love that so much.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one of those things that is really hopeful, you know, in those moments when you're moving from one season of life to another, and you are, you know, in the midst of, say, a wildfire for the first time, and you're freaking terrified, to be able to like let that land and look around you and see that like the death of all these trees, the fear and all of the animals, like that's part of their cycle. That's part of their experience. It's part of your experience. You're all experiencing it together at the same time. And also it's clearing the way for the next like phase of things. And both are beautiful. The fear is beautiful. The absolute unknown is beautiful. And like the moving into the birth of what's next is an incredible thing. We tend in our society to, in Western society, American society, let's really hone that down.
Sure.
We like honor and celebrate new and birth and like the beginning of seasons and like the action oriented, very systematic planning of our lives. And we're all about the pursuit of things. And we've lost this reverence for like the deconstruction of things. And I think what happens in that is that when deconstruction naturally occurs, because it always does, like that's what nature teaches us every single winter, and yet we're so blind to it.
Yeah.
When it occurs, we rail against it, and we get so angry, and like society just like freaks out, but it's beautiful too. Like it has meaning too. It has purpose too, whether that's on a micro level in our own personal lives, like as shit hits the fan, or on a cosmic level, or just in nature itself.
Yeah, beautifully put. And it's interesting because there is almost like this amnesia that we have as a species that's a collective thing, because like you said about winter, it's just long enough to forget what summer's like, and summer's just long enough to where you forget that this cold, dark, forbidding thing happens. And it's like this weird cycle that we exist in. And on a broader context, like there's so much, I guess, ancient things that we've just either forgotten or are irreverent to, or in denial of, that to go back to is so important, honestly, for the next like spiritual evolution and for human beings to survive. We have to go back to that. Like I don't believe that there's some tech solution to all the problems. There certainly are, and they need to be implemented, but it can't be the only solution.
Right.
And again, that internal battle of like returning to the source and purpose, and understanding that yes, everything is in a state of chaos, disarray, and deconstruction, but that cycle just perpetuates the next evolution and growth. And if we are the universe being self-aware, and it's our job to figure that out and be stewards of the earth in a way that allows it to continue, and like see how far we can go with it. Because otherwise, we're just going to crash and burn. Like that seems to be the prevailing like
the mindset of everybody. Yeah.
But then again, conversations like this, they're more common than not.
Oh yeah.
I talk to people all the time that feel the same way. I truly believe most people are good-hearted, kind, honest, compassionate. These things exist within people. It's just the framework in which we exist doesn't allow for them, or those things are viewed as, weakness, right? Like compassion is viewed as a weakness. To me, it's the most powerful thing there is.
And hard to do. Hard to drag yourself to the altar of that when you are in a shitty mood, or you're pissed off, or you've been hurt. Like for you to come to a conversation and have compassion in the face of your own just like pure
rage, and it's easy to be angry. Those are the easy emotions. They're difficult in their own way, but they're much easier path of least resistance than being in control of that. And I lose it all the time still. It's a never ending process of trying to self-mastery, of trying to figure out like,
same.
Why did I do that? Why did I snap like that? Why did I feel that way? But being that watcher, you know, it's so important. But interestingly though, just like conversations like this, and they are happening all over the place all the time. But I think the dominant, narrative that exists of like, say, the power struggle of like governments and all this stuff, like doesn't want people to think that that's happening, but really it is everywhere. Like,
on that exact same note, like earlier today, I was watching a podcast, and I'll give you some show notes on what that podcast is. You can drop it in.
Sure.
Essentially, she was discussing the rise and fall of nations and how we are essentially at a moment in time where America may or may not be falling, probably is.
I think so.
Yeah.
All signs point to yes.
Yeah, probably not a superpower much longer.
We're in the midst.
Yeah, and the thought is that, okay, is China the next rising superpower? Could be. Financially today, all signs are pointing to that's a curious thing, but there's a whole other wormhole we could go down there. I think that's maybe another conversation for another
geopolitical podcast.
For sure. But when you look at that arc of like the superpowers that have risen and fallen and risen and fallen, it's really only like the one half of the graph, right? Because you see the rise of like Spain, and you see the rise of, any of these other superpowers, and they fall. But what's the flip side of the graph? Like, what happens when they're falling? And we're all like looking at it from this financial standpoint. But when they're falling, what comes next? Are these the countries that are then going into like their own spiritual revolution, where they're like coming into being and like money is no longer at the forefront, and like they're realizing that other things matter, like time spent with family? Like what does Spain do? You know, like they enjoy family. They enjoy long, drawn-out meals and time spent resting. Yeah. Like that's important, and that's become more important. So what wisdom is on the other side of that wave? It's
interesting, because the Renaissance, I mean, oftentimes you have those moments of tremendous growth and technological growth and spiritual growth through plague and destruction and chaos.
Yeah.
It's almost like the catalyst that pushes that. I wish it wasn't so, but it seems to be. And I mean, like war-torn nations as well, like rebuild out of that into better things. I hope that in the context of the United States, that there's enough of a spiritual reckoning or awakening, which I do believe has happened. It's just being it's being suppressed in a big way, because
the revolution isn't televised.
Yeah, 100%. And why would it be? But it's being podcasted, I would say.
Yeah.
And the revolution really is in your heart and in your mind and in your spirit, because those things, nobody can ever take those from you. Those are yours. It's something I take tremendous like pride and ownership in, it being like, I am me. This was given to me and can't be taken from me by other human beings. Like, sure, someone could kill me, but I'll exist somewhere else. It's not, that's the one thing they can't ever get from you, or nothing can ever be taken from you, is your individuality, your freedom, your spirit, your soul. Like, that's yours, been printed, given to you by the universe, the creator, whatever.
Yeah.
That's yours. And I find that to be like, even as a little kid, I'm like, ooh, like stamped out. Like, that's, you're a divine creation of the universe. And like, no one can take that away. I don't care what any book or law says, like, you exist beyond that. You are
the Ryan expression of the universe. Yeah.
And so much beyond that too, because you're limitless. And back to like what we were saying, is like nothing exists in isolation of anything else. Like, we're made of the same constituent matter of the universe in the same ratio. Same with the earth. The earth is the same ratio of water and carbon and all these things. Like, that blows my mind. And I can't even, I'm not smart enough to even like comment on that. But just knowing that those ratios are the same, that's really cool. Like, wow, I am the earth, you are the earth, you are a tree.
Start getting into the sacred geometry aspect of things, and it gets trippy in such a beautiful way.
Yeah.
Such a beautiful way.
And I mean, talk about endless podcasts. Like, there's so many lanes to go, and that's why I love podcasting so much, is that when people always ask like, well, what do you talk about? Like, what don't you talk about? Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to necessarily keep it. I do want very well defined and like I want to do a 90s nostalgia podcast.
Yeah.
That'd be really cool. And obviously you wouldn't talk about geopolitics on there, or maybe you could in like
for sure. I mean, that's relatable then too.
That'd be a funny like thing to do, is just have like two non sequitur like things, like items. Like we play video games, but we talk about like deep philosophical things. Like why not?
Absolutely.
It'd be a good on-ramp for that. But yeah, just to kind of to reiterate like that reconnection and like, it's so important to be that intentional in life and like know that you exist for a reason and having those like immense purpose. I think artists too, like a lot of people feel this, like we were talking about on the way up here, of like either the burnout or feeling like imposter syndrome or like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? I want to bring this back to kind of like what we were talking about. We haven't even really discussed it on the podcast, but the book you've written, like that's a really amazing thing. Like I've always wanted to write a book, but would never even know where to begin. It's something I find fascinating, that a human being can condense their thoughts and emotions and feelings down to this thing and like create, I mean, the best works of humanity are written works. I mean, they really are beyond anything else, because they're timeless, they're immortalized. But tell me about that process. Like, how did that come about? Like, where did you begin? Well,
first of all, thank you. To be landed in that description is kind of awesome. Let me let that sink in for just a second. No, it's been really interesting, because I always knew that would be a part of my journey. And my partner and I sat down about 5 years ago to start writing a different story. And I fell in love with the process of writing nonfiction. Whereas my entire life up to this point, I had kind of thought, well, I'll be a fiction writer. Like I grew up loving Stephen King, kind of just diving into all the weird and wackiness of the fiction world. Obviously I didn't glomp onto Harry Potter, but that's because The Hobbit had my heart, like slightly different twist. And so for the longest time, it was just kind of the question of like, what will the story be? And fiction never really felt like it had enough value. I didn't really feel like I had anything in particular that I could say that would mean enough to be read by anyone. That inner critic was loud, and it took a long time for it to quiet down. And in the process of, C-19 and everything that happened over the past 2 years, the pandemic, everything being shut down, for a lot of people, I think that was a period of time of just like deep reflection. If we let it be, if we didn't get caught up in the total panic of everything in the world is changing, and kind of embrace like, okay, everything in the world is changing. What's the opportunity within this? For me, I feel like I've been through a handful of like mini spiritual revolutions in my life, and it started early because my parents got divorced at 4, and like I lived in this duality throughout my whole life. So I was constantly challenging my perception of like what reality was, based off of having two completely different lifestyles and having to like weave them together, like knowing that this is possible in one life and this is possible in another life, which I kind of already touched on. But in the process of the pandemic, I finally sat still, which I didn't know I needed. Like I've been in a lot of different long-term relationships, and I've had a lot of time spent in my business, and I've always had this, and I touch on this in the book, I've always had this need to perform, to be within a role, whether it was, social pressure or family pressure or just the need to like make a living and keep a roof over my head. And it gave me the permission to sit still long enough to really decide like, okay, do I want to continue this? You know, like if shit is hitting the fan, if I really have the choice, if the world really does go upside down, what would I choose? What would I want it to look like? And within that construct of deconstruction, the book just kind of came out. But it didn't come out during the process of the pandemic. It actually came out at the beginning of this year, and it just kind of came through meditation. It came through just sitting and like being really present to myself. I've kept up the process of meditating pretty much every single day for between an hour to 2 hours. For a little while there, it was like 4 hours. Like last summer, it was like heavy and light at the same time. But it just organically came to be through that. And because I was so in touch with like the process of the muse and the process of letting the book be written through me, I was finally able to detach from that fear of like whether or not it would be good enough. And that is probably the most freeing feeling I've ever felt.
That's a beautiful liberation, and how you describe that. I mean, it's palpable how passionate and real it is. So I love that. And thank you for sharing that, because I resonate with that so much. And oddly enough, 2020 was the greatest year of my life, even though it was like terrible in many ways. Yeah. For me, the studio and all the things, the direction of my life changed to become this. And out of that, in that stillness and in the chaos of everything, and I saw that opportunity as well, and being like, I can become whatever I want. This is like a blank slate. This is like a time I can spend. I walked like 10 miles a day during the pandemic, where I'm like, I can just walk and listen to books. I can't even go anywhere.
Right.
It's just great. Like, and you know, I was sad that, all the chaos and destruction and like societal problems, like, but rejecting that to a certain extent, because it's like, I don't want to be exposed to all that on a daily basis. Like, bad is going to happen, and like limiting the exposure and just finding the positive path out of there. And in many ways, the artistic one, it was a tremendous opportunity to get good at whatever you wanted to get good at. 'Cause like there was not a lot of other options. So if you wanted to get good at guitar, I mean, what a golden opportunity. Yeah. And in this case, writing a book, or at least meditating to the point of where a book, you're like a conduit for it. And I feel the same way about songwriting, is that I don't write them. They just they just happen.
It's just your choice to catch it or not.
Yes. And when you're open, it's like a transmitter receiver thing, where it's like, you're there and you're the vessel that it's passing through. Take it seriously, run with it. But yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because I often think, like, I wonder creatively, like, do other people just have this like thing they can tap into and switch on? No, I just think creativity is like this own realm of dimension, its own dimension. It's its own thing. And you either are in it and you're in unison with the waveform or whatever and riding it, or you're not. Yeah. And it's either on or off. I've never found any other way around it. Like, yes, you can set yourself up.
Be close.
You can get close. You can kind of, but true creativity, that true flow state, which is what we're all after, honestly. To me, I'm always chasing the flow state, is honestly the best feeling ever, but also one that when you're in, ride it as much as you can, get as much out of it. And then when you're out, be like, I got to get back to that place. How do I get back there? Yeah.
For me, I mean, it's already in print.
Oh, shit. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I self-published, and I've actually got an imprint, and put that under an LLC that I've got on my own. So
very cool.
Would be happy to have it be picked up by,
hopefully, right?
Penguin or Hay House, holla. Any of them would be fantastic. But that's not necessary at this point. I just love people to get out there and read it, and if they resonate with it, great. And if not, I totally understand that too, because it gets weird. Nice.
Well, weird is good. Honestly, I find when people are too either sure of themselves, I find it to be like, what I mean is, when they have such specific guardrails for like things, this is funny, this isn't funny, this is interesting. Like, I just have never lived in that rigid of a framework. I've always just been very kind of whimsical and like, I don't think that's so, just kind of always been that contrarian, I guess. But I think weird is good.
Yeah.
There's a good amount of it, and you need it because.
I mean,
it's interesting.
You can't write a book about the creative process without it getting weird.
Yeah. I mean, all creatives are weirdos. Like, my buddy makes fun of like me and the creative team all the time, where he's like, "You guys are just weird." But it's how you artists are just bizarre people and exist on a different plane, which is fine because society needs all manner of people. You need the very matter of fact people who are like, I'm the engineer who builds the bridge and there's no room for jokes. Okay, good.
I'm glad.
Thank you, bro.
Yeah.
Because I like that too. I like that side. I have an engineering side, but I'm also like, yeah, but maybe it's not also serious. Like
maybe the entire bridge is a joke.
Yeah.
Hopefully not.
It's a construct, literally.
Yeah.
That's how I find that word to be funny, because I'm like, yeah, everything's a construct technically. Like, you can get really weird on the syntax, or I don't know what that is, like the words we use. But the pseudonym, I know we touched on it in the beginning, but I wonder if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah.
And why you choose a pseudonym, because I love it. I love the idea, again, about you're able to express ideas, thoughts, emotions, realities, parallel universes through this character. And I feel like I have one as well. I've always had like another identity that I feel maybe the outlet for me is music. I think it definitely is. But it's not me or my name. I don't necessarily know. I haven't like defined who that person is like in name. It just exists in maybe the stuff I create through it, that feeling or identity. But I was just curious if you could elaborate a little more on that and what it allows you to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the permission slip around it. I really appreciate that, because it's something that I toyed with for quite a while. Like slapping that on the book was a tricky decision. And I think ultimately it's the same reason like I named my studio Blue Verve Studio. I didn't want it to be like Jen Marie or Jen Shilgan. Like Jen Marie would have been fine, but like as a woman, your last name is tied to something entirely different than what you are to some degree. Like our surnames are things that come and go depending on what happens to us in life. And I always wanted the studio to kind of be its own separate umbrella that could be a place for other creatives eventually if they wanted to be there. And then as far as the pseudonym for the book goes, like I wanted an umbrella that kind of encompassed everything. And so Infinitely Jen is, I'm kind of this infinitely curious, infinitely creative person. And it just felt like the best fit. It was between that and Jen in the Cosmos. And so either way, it was going to be a little spacey and a little out there.
Well, the cool thing is you can use both in different capacities. So that could be a podcast name. It can be a whole other avenue. The podcast I did earlier today, we talked about that, the infinite potential and infinite possibilities and infinite leverage that you actually do have if you tap into it. And that like, yeah, you can be those things too. Like whichever one you choose or author things under, like it'll take on its own form. Yeah. And I love that. I just really love the idea of having different vehicles for your creative outlet and identities. I've always, even since a little boy, I never wanted to be one thing. When people ask, what did you want to be when you grow up? I'm like, why would I be one thing?
Yeah.
I want to be all these different things, like a very multifaceted thing. I don't want to be one. Mm-hmm. I'm just this, which is great. Again, specialists are great. And I want people who are very, but for me, to me, it's like painting with one color. It's kind of, I want the whole spectrum, billions of colors. I want the whole thing. I want to see it all.
And they all feed each other.
Yeah.
Like all of these
the contrast.
Yeah.
You need the contrast. Yeah.
Exactly. They inform each other. When you play in one medium, it expands the way you use the next medium, like you being a musician and bringing that into, how you view, like, say, music videos, and then how you film, like, a wedding based off of that.
It's all rhythmic.
Exactly.
I film everything with rhythm, and it's all, I know there's, like, some tempo. Yeah. There's like a metronome to it.
That pulse of life.
And timing is everything. Like, we exist in time. We're literally immersed in it. There's the time we've created, and then there's, like, space-time. And, like, very different things, but like also you exist within them. So everything has that, pulse.
Yeah.
Pulse and frequency. And I find that to be fascinating. I don't know. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and by all means, let's press on, because it's really cathartic, talking and episodes and, getting to know people on a deeper level. Like we've been friends on Instagram for like 2 years maybe. Right. And
went for a few walks in person and then both got busy
and we were both different people then too. Yeah. Like the metamorphosis from then to now is just like, I couldn't even, measure the difference. Like, yes, we do a lot of the same things, but there's been a cool evolution in both of our lives independently, both as creatives and people and spirit. If you're not growing, you're doing something wrong, and that might not be everyone's fault. There's certain limiting factors and environmentally. So I'm grateful. I want to preface that by saying, like, very grateful to be in a position where those things are attainable and, afforded. But there is an element of choice as well, because, for a long time, I kind of just, didn't go. I opened a studio once in the wrong place at the wrong time with the right intention, but just the wrong. I had all these self-limiting beliefs surrounding it about, I need this desk. That's very expensive. It's like a $3,000 studio desk, where I'm like, why do I need that to get started? Why would I put the expensive piece of gear as the limiting factor for me getting started? My friend, who's now like one of the top music producers in the US, right? I went to IKEA with him back in the day and bought like the cheapest desk, and he had the cheapest laptop and this Craigslist bought M-Box recording interface, and that didn't stop him. So I think about these self-limiting beliefs and factors of like, I need a new camera. It's like, dude, my 5D Mark II in there, the old school one, is a great camera still. If you need it, I've used it a second shot on a wedding once with it, because it was like my only option. It crushed. I was like, why don't I use this more often? It's more about what you do with it, really. Like, even the T2i, like I could still bust that thing out and like, it puts
you in a different mindset. When you know you're working with a tool that you don't normally use, like it brings out that creativity. It brings you to a place of having to move more, having to look more clearly. You come to it with fresh eyes.
100%. And not having that thing will shoot 30 frames a second photos, like insane. And that allows you to get shots where it's like, I got to be way more intentional with my shutter. Like, no. And like, yes, got it. Whereas, and I love having these cameras because they're very, mirrorless cameras are amazing. Like they're fast. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Light quality is fantastic. You shoot on Nikon? Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Are you on the mirrorless?
I do. I do have older gear as far as mirrorless goes. I am on a Z5.
Ooh, cool.
So
very nice.
Definitely like almost first gen as far as their mirrorless goes.
They knocked it out of the park with that camera.
They did a really good job, and it's actually got dual SD cards, so that's worth having.
Very, very.
That was the selling point, pretty much.
Same. These have dual as well, and I love the ability to just put two 128s in there and be like, I'm good. Like I never have to like swap them or worry about them.
Yeah.
And I also use it as like a barometer, like measurement of like
how much more work you really have to do.
I filled 128 gigs. I need to slow down a bit. Or
I'm gonna hate myself 2 days from now when I edit this. Yeah.
Yes. Or if I'm like, I need to shoot more. Like I've only got 30 gigs on here. I feel like I should shoot more, especially with video. I use that as the measurement of like, I should have a little bit more by this point. It's cool that we both have worked in the wedding world too, because I feel like there's this kinship amongst wedding photographers or vendors.
Any wedding vendor, totally.
Yeah, there's like this unspoken like.
You've been in the trenches.
Yeah, and I never saw myself getting into weddings ever. Like it was. Yeah. I mean, I grew up dirt biking and shooting shotguns, and like I was like a redneck. Like you know what I mean? And like I never thought I'd be in the wedding world, and
wasn't even a blip.
No,
yeah,
I attended them, but it's been such a pleasant surprise, and really one of the most meaningful things that I've done in my life is being able to immortalize people's moments like that, where I used to think of weddings as just like these pageants that didn't matter and whatever, and they certainly exist. We've all done those weddings, but
yeah,
I feel like the clients that seek out like real creative photography and videos and stuff, like
they care.
They care. Way, yeah. They go to that distance and they want to, and I don't know, just the satisfaction you get from doing that and delivering that, and then looking back at it and getting messages and letters years later where you're like, whoa, that's still, you just watched the video 5 years later, and it's like, I think that
still hits. Yeah.
It's you're preserving time, which is a really big deal. I mean, I remember realizing as a little boy that a camera froze time, and I'm like, that's the most profound thing ever. Like, there it is. There's my grandpa who I never met. Like, there's a picture of him. And I just think that's really cool. And I never will get over the fact that you're freezing time.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
In a way that you can't in any other way.
Yeah.
Like, human beings cracked a code in a little bit where it's like, you're free. It's a profound thing.
I'm a massive quantum physics nerd, and I'm all about multidimensionality and things existing simultaneously and all that jazz. So.
Full of surprises over here. That's really cool. I think it's Isaac Asimov. I think that's just a physics book.
Yeah.
But it's way over my head, and I would just read it just for funsies because I'm like, I mean, I'll listen to theoretical physicists talk, and I find it fascinating that Yerkes is over there too, that we happen to live. Have you ever gone there at night?
Yeah. And
just laid next to, it's one of the most like intense feelings in a way I can't describe, but you must know because it
feels a little bit like a portal. It's kind of weird. Like,
I think,
I don't want to say it's a gateway to something, but there are
remember Stargate, that movie Stargate? Yeah. Really cool. Yeah. Totally aside, but like, I think maybe what that feeling is that it is a connection to something so much further away that like, reflected through that telescope is dying stars and like things that we can't reach, but it's been reflected through that. So in some way it's like a tendril we've connected to something so far away. Like
the consciousness aspect of it, all these minds who have been in touch
Einstein
with,
alone.
Right. And all of the people on his team who, they're not in the limelight whatsoever.
Yeah. Fritz Schniff, whatever, like some guy, like some German guy.
Beautiful, beautiful minds, and they've been there. They've had these wildly expansive thoughts in that place, and like that place holds that resonance. Like it's the same concept of like ghosts, right?
Yeah.
But like, is there really an aberration? Who knows? But there was an experience held in a space, and the space holds like the vibration of that experience. It
can't not. And some people are more highly in tune with that. I think some people are a little overzealous with it. And everywhere in between, it's like a whole thing. Again, I used to be very dismissive of anything like that, paranormal, extraterrestrial. I'm like, whatever. Until I started experiencing things on my own where I'm like, well, I can't explain that. So I can't deny or deprive people of their own experience, because if I haven't lived it, I don't know. I can't tell you didn't feel that. Right. Or like if you see a UFO or something where it's like, well, I can't explain that. And yes, there are people that do it for attention seeking, but there's also people who've seen stuff where you're like, I just don't know what I saw. And maybe it was an experimental aircraft, but kind of defied the laws of physics and went really fast and was all this crazy light. Same is true of paranormal as well.
Totally.
We've all gone into a space, even here sometimes. I mean, this building's weird at night. I've walked out there and been like, And funny enough, like
that hallway though, I can.
You know the lady that does the haunted tour in town.
Yeah.
She always dresses in like almost like. She always dresses
down at the library.
Yeah. She walks around like a speaker. Well, one night it was like midnight, maybe even later. I left out the door and she was giving the tour and talking about this building, and I come like obliviously like barreling out the door and freak everybody out because they're like, oh, but she's talking about how it's haunted, and I come out like frazzled from an edit session. I'm like, oh, hey guys. And then I thought to myself, I'm like, that's funny. She has some intel on this building that I don't know about. And I mean, it's built in the 30s or something. There's got to be some kind of conjured spirits.
Some weird things have happened in this town for sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the story of Library Park and
isn't there a ghost that wanders around there? Yeah.
She'll like nab women in the middle of the night.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
Don't go walking over there.
Yeah, I've done it a few times, and it's
tempting fate, are you?
So far so good.
Yeah, I know.
Not with that attitude, just kind of a general like
respect.
Hey,
I'm
We're
here.
gonna be here.
Let's chill.
Yeah.
We're good.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't nab me into the underworld just yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if you do, you know, make sure it's a cool experience, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. There better be like pizza there.
Yeah.
Like,
Show me something worthwhile.
something good, like good quality baked goods. I'm in.
Oh, yeah. Go anywhere for a daily Danish.
Speaking of which, you ever had the chocolate, gosh, what are they called? Croissants at Simple.
So good. So good.
My buddy brought one by one time as like a thank you. And I'm like, how good could it be? And I'm like, I literally like ate it. I'm like, I'm going to buy another one right now. Like I've never had that reaction to something, you know, like
Right?
that visceral, like I need to go get one now. Like, it's so good.
This episode brought to you by Simple Bakery in
Yeah, I know.
Lake Geneva.
I've thought about doing a lot of like name drops of things I just like.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm like, well, and also sponsoring episodes by things that are like abstract, where it's like
Ball jars.
yes, exactly. I love those, and I'm glad you drink out of them because I used to, for forever I only drank out of ball jars. It was like the only thing, and
Right.
then I don't know what happened. I need to revert back to my hippie ways because I was like a total hippie. Like I don't mean was, and I don't even mean hippie and like I was raw vegan. I lived on basically like a commune, more or less. Grew food, grew weed. Literally wouldn't use any synthetic anything. Would just like meditate in the river, like lay in like all this stuff.
You just described my high school experience.
Yeah.
Like literally my nickname in high school was hippie.
Yeah, well, there's worse things to be called.
Well, yeah, except that it's, you know, usually because you're smelly, and I'm a little bit of a smelly
whatever.
person, but
I never the whole like synthetic detergents and all that stuff is like, okay, so I'm gonna douse myself in this
chemical barrage of who knows what.
it's crazy. And hygiene is good, but also too, like there's nothing wrong with swimming in the lake or the river or
Right.
being like a human. Don't let people deprive you of your humanity. And like there's something cool about the just being a feral. Like I love just the wildness of it being like.
So I mean, let's talk a little bit about festivals, because you were just at Flow Fest.
So are you.
And it's a baby festival.
Very
It's
cool.
in its infancy.
Yes.
But definitely bringing a vibe together for sure. Over at Alpine Valley, and I think one of the beautiful things about festivals that people like really underestimate is that they are that experience of being able to be like feral and just kind of go and explore.
Yeah.
All the weirdness that you can encounter and never really knowing what it'll be.
There were a whole cast of characters there, and I love that because there were, pretty age diverse, and there's a lot of different people there. Even though it wasn't like super packed, the humble beginnings of a very fruitful, I can tell that festival is going to be a household name in the next 5 years. It's got all the makings of it. It's got all the right intention, the right people, the right vendors, the right bands. And what I thought was really cool too, on the artist perspective of how every single artist played their heart out.
Yeah.
And that to me is the measure of an artist, a musician, whatever, is that they will play. There might as well have been 100,000 people there, because the energy transfer that they did, every single one of them, nobody mailed it in. Nobody didn't try.
No, they all brought it like the place was just.
Were you there
like
for Grace Potter the
overflowing.
first night?
No, I wish I would have been.
Wild.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of her, right? Like, sorry, Grace, but like I'm your new biggest fan. But she was
Which is great, right? You go to a show and you find a band you absolutely love that you didn't know. Like, best experience to walk away with.
She's like the quintessential rock star. And I was just like, dude, how are you so rad? I've never heard of you. Thank you for coming here. Being like, it was just so cool how intense in the best way possible she was. She was so good. And so she closed the show. She ad-libbed, told a story about the origins of Flow Fest and Alpine Valley, and she tied in all of these references in like while she's shredding on her flying V guitar. I'm like,
snap.
This woman is the most amazing performer I've ever seen, because it was literally like a freestyle Def Jam poetry slam with rock elements. I'm like, this is the coolest shit I've ever seen. It was really cool.
I am so sad I missed that. And
she'll probably be back.
Yeah.
I feel like, cause it was cool what she said. She said, like, I can tell that this place is going to be, this is the beginning of something like really special.
Yeah.
And I agree. I know how difficult. I've been involved in productions and big productions, and there's so many moving parts. It's so hard to pull off. And like, I had a great time. No lie. It was really cool. And met some, like, the connections I made, they were amazing. And it was cool because when I saw you guys there, I didn't know it was you because I was like far away, and I was like filming, right? And I'm like, oh, I got to get that couple right there because they're just wild and have this cool vibe.
We were accused a few times of being like the power couple, and I was like, I don't know where that's coming from, but okay, that's fun. Yeah,
it's a decent thing to be accused of.
Yeah,
like, all right, I'll take that. What's up? No, but you guys had a whole vibe and like a whole identity, and like I love when you guys just showed up to like vibe.
Yeah.
And looked the part and acted the part. So it was really cool to see, and just expression, you know, people being themselves. And what other place involves wakeboarding during like what?
Right.
Very cool.
Amazing.
Very cool.
And people coming out from Florida to come and show off their skills. It was really fantastic. The sound was,
oh my gosh,
just
that
beautiful.
Stage and sound and lighting.
Yeah.
And what's cool is like, I didn't know a lot of those bands by name, but then I heard their songs. I'm like, I know all of these songs.
Right.
Hippie Sabotage. I'm like, these guys are huge.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Really good showing. And so Andy is not a jam band guy.
Okay.
But Twiddle totally converted him. They were fantastic.
That guitar player, the bass, all of them.
And the pianist, like the way they vibe together. Loved it.
So I'm curious, did you write this a combination like by hand, typing, texting? Like, is there a whole bunch of different ways that you came up with ideas, and then would you take voice notes and then transcribe those?
That's a really solid question. Kind of a combination of all those things, actually. And taking voice notes and transcribing it and then going back and editing it is such a mind fuck.
You could, I bet.
Yeah.
Because of the tediousness of it, or because you don't always translate?
Yeah, things get transcribed in ways that they really aren't meant to be, and, and you get words that repeat, and you have to sit there and untangle your words.
You might also think it's kind of like having a dream or something where you're like trying to remember like a very distinct feeling or emotion that you had, but then like maybe it didn't translate right. I think that all the time. Like, I'll watch back episodes that I do or I'm on or whatever, and I'm like, the thought was there,
right? But the texture's different now.
Yeah, the way I thought I came across versus how I did, not the same.
Yeah,
and, I mean, that's just existing in general. Like,
100%. And I think that's the trip of like photography, like editing for me, and like working with a second shooter who's like, I'm gonna get you some marketing images, and they take a shot of you working, and you're like, oh god,
do not.
That's what I look like.
Oh yeah, I know, it's a real ego destroyer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every shot of me at a wedding, I look like a crackhead who should be removed from the wedding.
Far too tired to exist in this social environment.
That's not how I look at weddings. Turns out it is.
It is. Yeah.
Like
but you're working, so like it's okay. Like, no one's judging the catering staff for looking totally exhausted either. Like,
true.
Well, most of the time.
Weddings,
it's a weird microcosm.
It is, and we could do it. We should do episodes about it, and we could tell horror stories. I mean, I got a bunch, and mostly good stories though. Honestly, I must say, like, most of the things have been great and great experience and great people. And I've run into people on the street before. We filmed their wedding like far away. I'm like, whoa, like, it's just cool. Like, do you get this? I'm sure you do, because once you've done a certain amount of weddings and edited a certain amount of catalogs, like, you've met 50,000 people.
Oh yeah.
So like, I'll be out and I'm like, my ex-girlfriend, she would be like, you don't know that person. You always say you know these people and you don't know them. I'm like, I know that guy. I'd be like, groomsmen. It was just a guy, you know, I know their face because I edited this stupid.
And you've looked at them for literally 8 to 16 hours. No problem.
Like, I edited your quick collection.
I know that squint from somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. I've had that a bunch, and then be like, it'll be like a random Tuesday, like months later, like, that wedding in Starved Rock.
Yeah.
There's the groomsman guy.
Brad's best man.
Yeah. Train wreck speech. All right.
I shouldn't have made that joke about the short skirt. Man.
I know. Sometimes.
Yeah. Just keep it out.
I actually want to make a wedding speech boot camp.
Oh, that's a great idea.
And basically like not just give people a template, but also like the framework of how, because you can do a lot in the edit. I've turned some terrible speeches into like actually like decently meaningful stuff. And, but it's a big ask to ask people to be like, stand up in front of all these people you don't know and give a meaningful speech that will impress me and make me cry. Like,
yeah,
damn you, dude.
Right.
I had to give a best man speech one time, and I remember being like, oh, I got this. I've done this a million times. And then I started doing it. I'm like, this is way different.
Right.
I mean, it was still good, but I was like, oh, right. I didn't really rehearse it. I wrote it a lot and like edited the words, but I wasn't like, yeah, I haven't actually spoken this through a microphone PA in front of people, or like, whoa, when everyone's just looking at you like expecting to be impressed and half of them are hammered. I'm like, man, this is a weird vibe.
And there's kind of that like delay between what you're saying and how drunk people are and whether or not they're going to get what you're saying. Yeah.
I always like tell people like, yeah, limit the inside jokes to maybe 2. Cause it's like, if it's just rolling inside jokes, like nobody gets what your weird, obscure college reference jokes. Like,
yeah,
it's cool between you, but like, you can't have it be like the substance of the, anyway, I think.
And if it's something super embarrassing, like they're not going to want you to say it anyway.
I've had that happen a few times where I'm like, you humiliated this guy. He's
in the place of honor. This isn't his roast.
No,
this is his wedding. Yeah.
And like, you can definitely joke with people and tell like a semi-embarrassed, but like, dude, not that one.
Yeah.
What are you doing? It's almost like the wedding singer. Where he's
nothing
like,
about sex.
Yeah,
Nothing about
like,
their significant other or
what?
exes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or anything illegal. Really.
No. I've had people reference like drugs and stuff where I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, this is.
Unless you really know the crowd. And if it's the right crowd.
If it's a McHenry crowd, fair game.
Yeah.
Like McHenry or Fox Lake, we're all good. But
you just got to know.
Not those wholesome Evanston folk. They're too fragile.
Can't take it. Can't take the heat.
Anyway, we should do a wedding podcast because I think it'd be fun and like probably get bookings from it. Not that you need any more, but like who knows? Like that's to me, that's part of the thing is like why Phil, my friend, was so successful and is so successful is that like his website is like really there's a lot of jokes on it and like he's a weirdo. Yeah. So people buy into that and they're like, look at this guy. This guy's hilarious. You know, the really serious people, it's like, you don't want them.
Yeah. Well, because you have to spend a whole day with this person. Yeah. Like you have to literally book based off of.
Would you invite them to your wedding to have fun and like party with? Like that's who you're inviting is like a.
Can you stand being in a room with them for 15 minutes? Because if not, you don't want them there for an 8 or a 10-hour day.
Who was it? Okay, you know Dina. Mm-hmm. She was like, she told me this year that she was doing a wedding and the photographer showed up and was like, "Hi, can I borrow your phone?" And she's like, "Yeah, sure." And she gives her her phone and she starts taking photos around. She's like, "Yeah, I forgot my camera." Oh shit. Yeah.
Like where? How? What?
The only thing. Okay, I forgot memory cards or like a battery or something, but it wasn't like, oh, now I can't do my entire job. Like,
I could see forgetting one of the 3 cameras that I personally bring.
Did I bring my drone? I'm so
yeah, you're going to check for that.
Good stuff. This has been fun.
Oh, man.
And it is like a therapy or like cathartic because...
It is. It's like a creative decompression.
And you were nervous.
I was nervous.
But it didn't translate at all. I didn't get nervous from you at all.
That's good.
It usually is like really obvious, you know, when people like can't even, yeah, you're just like, what do I do?
Yeah. Well, let's do an entire one where we just are the most nervous versions of ourselves.
That'd be kind of funny, like like literally shaking and spilling stuff and like
shit. That could be dangerous.
Like the most unconfident podcast ever, like self-conscious. I have a client right now and I don't take on any work really anymore because the comeback is so like it takes up all my bandwidth, which is good because I love it. But
yeah,
she's like, I can't be on camera. I can't talk. I'm like, listen, if you're selling your business, like you have to. It's not an option. We're not going to like sub that out to somebody else. Like it's gonna be you. Like no one else can sell this but you. So you're gonna do it. And that's all there's to it. Because it's like
just do it enough times that you eventually stop caring about it.
And like 10 minutes in anyway, you're like, oh, what fucking, I remember the first time I set all this stuff up and I'm like, what if I'm like, who cares? Like it doesn't.
Right.
Nobody I haven't even posted any of my episodes anyway. So I'm like, what do I care?
All right. So the name of your podcast for everybody on my podcast who wants to check out your podcast.
It's called The Positive Bias. I've effectively done one episode ever, which was it was cool because it set the tone. And I actually thought about, I'm too tired tonight, but I was going to do a follow-up episode to this of the second episode, but I'll save that for tomorrow, I think. Because now that I have this set up, which it hasn't been in about a month or two, tomorrow will be my second episode, which will be cool because it's a whole metamorphosis from the first one till now. I've got a whole different like outlook and direction with it. So
what can we look forward to?
On this episode or in general?
Both.
This one's going to be a reflection on basically self-belief, purpose, following through, like setting those targets, but also like not being so rigid, and also again, following that compass creatively and saying yes to life and experience and just being along for the ride, but in control of it as well. Like walking that fine line of being in control and at the mercy of like something much larger. Like control things you can and just don't even waste energy on the things you can't, because what's the point? I spent too much time and energy on those things before.
And that totally plays into that balance between like the masculine and the feminine, like within you.
Oh yeah.
And that structure and really having to like drive forward versus kind of listening for what is trying to come through you.
Yeah.
And open up and like let that exist.
I also want to become a gifted listener. Not that I'm not, but it's the most important part of communication. It's tenfold more important than talking, because anyone can talk, but listening, like truly listening and then responding meaningfully is like an art form. Mm-hmm. And we're taught to wait our turn to just talk and not really listen and like intuit what the people are saying and how to respond meaningfully. My favorite podcasters and conversationalists, they listen so well. And it's almost like their silence is like its own thing. We're like, yes. And then they pause and then they say something meaningful where it's like, I shouldn't be so quick to try and have a meaningful response to something, because it takes time to formulate. And
you can tell, tell when someone's actually hearing you versus when
just waiting to talk.
Right.
My turn.
You can literally like see it.
Shut up. It's about me now. Yeah. No, that happens. It's like a little kid, right? Where they're like, where they'll interrupt and be like, say something like, okay, well that meant nothing, but okay.
I'm so guilty of that. 100% guilty of that.
I do it too. Well, and there's nothing, it's just being excited about communication. You can be, but this format too though, like, and I'll probably I need to get more headphones, because I like them without, but I just do it so I know that our levels are good. Yeah. I need to spend some more money in here and get this place looking, or just better acoustic treatments.
I can see the gears turning and like you're being reinvigorated and like re-inspired about the process.
You are cool. Correct, because it's been on hiatus for a while because, other fires to tend to and whatever. And that's actually a big learning, maybe too, in that episode, is just being like, I love having multiple roles and different things, but also being like, let's hone it down to these three and be like, okay, I can't be the whole band at once.
Yeah.
Just get good at whatever, drums, guitar, do all of them, but just understand like you can't do all of them at once.
Yeah.
My friend taught me a very important lesson with this, with video, because I was like I would set up 3 cameras and be like, it's like, dude, just get the one really good shot instead of 3 mediocre shots. Like, oh shit, you're right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to use the 2 mediocre ones. You're going to use the one good one. And you run the risk of ruining the one good one by attending to one that doesn't matter.
Exactly.
How many times has it happened at a wedding where you're like, you got a good shot. You're like, maybe it's a little better. And then you go there and you're like, wasn't better. Had the shot.
And then it's too late to change it because the moment is already happening.
Yeah. It happens millions of times where I'm like, or I would like stop recording or something, or it'd be like, okay, but then the thing happens and you're like, I just literally record for 10 minutes and hit stop. And that's when it happened. Like the patience of being like, just wait.
And that's the same thing when you're waiting for that conversation, you know, when you're waiting for someone else to finish up and like interject what you feel like you're going to say, you miss like the beauty of that moment and what it could organically open up to. And you're like stalling the process, you know, it's like this stopgate that is keeping the natural flow from occurring.
I also notice, and maybe you do as well, is like my response changes throughout the duration of what they're saying. We're middle of it. I'm like, I'm going to say this. And then I'm like, I'm not going to say that. Like it just changes. So like, if you attach too much to like, I'm going to say this, it's like, well, that's not the best. It's not the best response.
Right.
And sometimes the best response is none at all. Cause like when you had a really good run there, we both did for a while, you know, but there was one in particular where I'm like, I don't even want to make a noise cause I don't want to interrupt that flow. Cause if I even just said, yeah, my voice doesn't belong in that statement. Like it's just you. Like, I don't want to make noise and I'm so glad you said that because for me, that's something to be super conscious of, like moving forward. And that's you're
like
really good. You're really good. You have like, cause, some people don't have you bring into it just being a good conversationalist to begin with. So that's a huge leg up because some people don't, you know, do that or communicate very well. But,
thank you.
I mean, hour and however long you've gone, 2 hours almost. Yeah. It's a lot of stuff. Anyway, we could talk endlessly. Episode 1 success. Whatever it ends up being, 1,000 reels on Instagram.
Yeah.
100 reels.
No, I don't have the patience for that.
It's all I do anymore.
I would not put you through that. You're already doing that in one scope. You know?
I made 300 reels out of a couple podcasts, not a couple, like 15 podcasts, and it's tedious, but I got it down to a science where I'm like, I figured out how you can batch export from Premiere, not from the timeline, but you nest them and then drag them into a folder and then you can export through Media Encoder.
Nice.
Yes. Otherwise I was like, how do I export 300 things? You have to do it as nests and then in a folder and then batch export to Media Encoder. Time
saver. Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, thank you for all of your tips on Instagram. You are fantastic with those. Like,
it's mostly me complaining about Premiere and like, you know, but it's
helpful. It's constructive criticism of your own workflow. You know, it's good.
And a lot of it is just like who I am. Talk about like the persona. Like my Instagram is not like, it's almost like a character.
Yeah.
I'm playing
that
a character.
Comes through, for sure.
I'm glad. Okay. Cause some people take it seriously. I'm like, no, man, I'm not being serious. Like
there's like a level of sarcasm there that really
I'm always just like
brings it home.
Yeah. Which is fun. Cause just another vehicle to be like irreverent and sarcastic and like, really I'm a compassionate, loving person who just like, but it's like,
we have to be able to poke fun at things to bring light to them, you know?
Rant and rave and like play characters. And it's important.
For sure.
But let's, I forget how we were teeing this up. I just want you to read some of what you've written. You selected a passage, right?
Yeah, it's actually, it's a poem. It's the title poem of the book. And it's called Unravel to Weave, which is the title of the book. It's a little redundant, but here we are anyway. So forgive me, I'm actually just going to read this straight off my phone because that's what I've got handy here, but here we go. Loving you has been a complicated mess of strings tied around my heart, tangled around your fingers, stretched between our states, shivering on the breeze, exposed, twisted, fluttering. As we learned which fibers belong between which lungs, whose coils were whose, and whether frayed ends were to be burnt and sealed, or reapplied as sutures to past wounds that had torn open. Under the force of love's intimate pressure, we are here to learn, to live each other, to love ourselves, to intertwine like our hands at night, and somehow maintain our balance, our autonomy, our freedom without flight.
That's really beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm no poet myself. I love I felt that. I don't know how else to say that, but I really did feel that. And that's like, it's a hard thing to convey those deep of emotions and feelings and complexities and nuance in a short thing. And that's what poetry is so beautiful about, is that you can convey like eternal emotions and feelings in a relatively short amount of time. And to the point of the TikTok becoming so short and whatever, what it fails to do is that right there.
Yeah.
In a short, you can't fake that, because that's a timeless, beautiful piece. And it really it resonates. And wow, that's something. And I can only imagine the remainder of the book itself is.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
I appreciate that.
So where can we find this? How can interested listeners?
Yeah.
How do we find this?
Right now it's available on Amazon. I'll drop a link for you in the show notes, and you can get it through either paperback or Kindle, if that's your preference. I always love holding a book in my hand and flipping through the pages and, abusing the pages, doing the dog ear thing and underlining things and all that. But if Kindle is your preference, it's available there too. And you can also check out our Instagram, Unravel to Weave, and Infinitely Jen. You can also find me at Blue Verve Studio, which is where all of our photography and videography stuff lives. So yeah, come check us out there. And when I say us, I mean me and my team at Blue Verve Studio and all of the wonderful people in life who have pushed Unravel to Weave into existence, because I feel like as creatives, we are also kind of an amalgamation of all of the people who influence us and affect us in life.
Could never have said it better myself, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I really appreciate you coming by and being persistent in making this happen and following through on your dreams. Like, what an accomplishment.
Yeah, and same to you. It's been such a joy to watch where Ardent Digital has gone over the past few years. Cool. And seeing it kind of unfold in the world. So cheers to you on your journey, and thank you for everything tonight. And I look forward to chatting again.
Let's do it again next week.
Sounds good.
Bam.
All right.
Good stuff. Bye.
Bye.